to hear these words. I walk this road so very long to show the way, so I walk this road with holes in my hands to make the way. No, you are not alone. You will be free. The journey begins and ends with me. Miles. It starts with a step. What are you waiting for? I'm waiting. You run the race, thinking you've almost won, and you think right. You've only begun. Thinking you're on, suddenly find you're no, you are not alone. The journey begins and ends with me. Miles. It starts with a step. What are you waiting for? I'm waiting. What are you waiting? I'm waiting. We're going to take just a second or so, okay, 10 seconds, and try to understand this scene. Jesus is not just to become the redeemer and fulfillment of prophecies for those of his own tribe, that is the Jews. He is to be the redeemer of the world. And I think of that statement by Pilate, then you are a king. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. It was a statement of recognition. Could it be that Christ was holding out redemption to Pilate? I think so. I absolutely think so. As I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons that royal houses begin to fail lies in the ever-widening gap that exists between ruler and people. We can see that in our own revolution of the late 1700s and 1776 when we had the Declaration of Independence. Our forefathers and mothers were furious that they were being taxed with no one to stand before King George III with no representation on their behalf. And this tax on the simple comfort of tea was just like the last straw that broke the camel's back. And revolution became the end, not just a dream. The revolution of 1917 of the Russian people is an even better example. So if you know the personal histories of the czars, you can understand why the gap grew wider and wider. Tsar Nicholas II, he was the last ruler, last Tsar of Russia. His father, Tsar Alexander II, ruled with an iron fist, absolutely. Now his dad, Alexander I, was a remarkable ruler. He had created a Duma, which is like our Congress. It had two houses in it for better representation of the people. He had begun to move away from an exclusive monarchy to a constitutional one. He was all in favor of reform, but the change, quite frankly, was too late. It didn't come fast enough. And so a revolutionist threw a bomb underneath his carriage and blew his legs off. And so his son, Tsar Nicholas, who became Tsar Nicholas II, Tsar Alexander II at his death, and then Nicholas II, they watched him die in the St. Michael's Palace, bleeding all over that marble floor, and they never forgot it. And so Alexander II ruled with an iron fist against his people for taking his dad's life, and Nicholas the same way. He believed absolutely in the divine right of kings. He was placed there by God to rule, but he wasn't going to let that happen to his family. And of course we know the ending and what did happen. And because of what they had witnessed, quite frankly, there was a wedge that was driven farther and farther between them and the people. And it would never be bridged. We have to remember that the world was changing fast because of the Industrial Revolution. There was changes in communication and transportation. Trade had exploded, as well as the exchange of ideas. One was self-rule. One was common rule, also called communism, which appealed to the millions of serfs who were suffering in deplorable conditions in the broad expanse of Russia. Think about it. They were freezing to death and they were starving to death. There was never enough to eat. There was always a lack of fuel. Now, history tells us that the czars actually lived simply, but those from the outside world heard stories of lavish lifestyles and the gifts given among the Romanovs. It is said that one room at the Palace of Tsarskoye Selo was completely covered in amber. That's how they paneled the room. Of course, that was ransacked during World War II, and it's never been found. The original amber has never been found. Also, the gifts that the czars gave to their wives, the Romanov, the Fabergé eggs, worth millions of dollars. And so people would think, when hearing about that out in the Urals, one of those eggs could feed our entire county, if you would, or our cities for years and years and years, and no one would go hungry. The last two czars lived lives that were too luxurious to even imagine. And so when revolution began, it swept the country voraciously. So think on all of that minor history lesson that I just gave you about the Russian Revolution, and think about the time of when Christ was born. So the situation was very similar in the Middle East. The world was rapidly changing. Rome was a republic, and when Rome conquered a country or a people, they would often allow the ruler, the king, whatever, to remain in place, and they would allow the people to maintain their religion. And why did they do that? Those were gestures of goodwill, but it also kept the people from revolting. There would be no uprising to overthrow Rome. So at the time of Christ's birth, all roads led to Rome. And trade routes were busy throughout the entire nation. Even in Israel, major trade route right there through Damascus. The Israelites who were taught to keep to themselves according to their laws, suddenly were surrounded by foreign tongues spoken by people who not just spoke differently, but ate differently and worshiped differently. And so they began to intermingle. And in some ways, they were thinking their world is falling apart. And where's this great Messiah? He's supposed to come along and, reign as a great military leader. That was their interpretation. And also at the time of Christ's birth, Judaism still required animal sacrifices to atone for sin. The Temple of Solomon was as yet an exclusive environment with a Holy of Holies, that is the altar area. There was a small area that was completely covered by curtains, and you were not allowed to enter into it. Only the priest, one day a year, and he had to have a rope tied around his leg in case he wasn't worthy enough and he was struck dead. And then they could pull him out. So, the Holy of Holies separated the people from God. And the timing was ripe for the Messiah to come, for Jesus Christ to come, with this new message that God desired above all things to have a personal relationship with his creation. And his Son would be the mediator. Followers of the way prayed to God through Jesus, his Son. And then after he died and he ascended into heaven, the Holy Spirit was sent to be our counselor and our guide, our inward guide. The time for the separation between God and man had come to an end. And so at the moment of Jesus' death, and we know this, we know our Bible enough, the veil in the temple was rent from top to bottom, so that people would understand God would no longer be separated from his creation. An old hymn proclaimed this: if you can't bear the cross, then you can't wear the crown. Anybody know that hymn? My daddy knew that hymn. And it speaks about our royalty as members of a royal household and a royal priesthood, and our responsibility, who we are to be about. Because we're told that when we believe, we become a member of God's royal household. So in order to don the robes of a priest, a member of this royal priesthood, we have to be willing to bear the cross, to wear that crown. Kingship that leads to self-preservation is the way of the world. It is no longer a viable way to rule. We know that. That's why we have very few kings in the world. The kingship that Jesus exercises is not about fighting for self-preservation. It's about leading as a servant. It's about recognizing the importance of sacrifice and how crucial it is to connect each person who comes across our path with Jesus Christ, if it's only for a second. That light must be shown. One of the stories of the late King Hussein of Jordan was that he used to dress in the robes of a common person and then go in disguise and wander the streets of Amman to stay in touch with his people, to know more about his people, to hear how they were dissatisfied with the kingdom or satisfied with new rules and regulations or new freedoms, if you will. And we know that Christ did the very same thing for us. And we know that he continues to do this today. He turns up in the homeless person who comes across our door and knocks on the door and needs something to eat. He is seen in a person who's incarcerated in prison who feels hopeless. He comes in the form of a battered woman in a shelter or a teenager who's being beaten up by a gang. He whispers to us that as we care for them, we are caring for him. And that's what a loving sacrifice means. Serving Christ the King requires humility. And when we acknowledge him as our King, we allow his power and impact to change us. And over time, we do indeed become a member of the royal priesthood of all believers. When Christ came to earth, he came issuing a new paradigm. Everything had changed. He came as our sacrifice, as our redeemer, our mediator, and our servant leader. And our job as believers must be that we claim our place among the priesthood of believers. Step up and claim that. Be that. So that we can better serve him. sacrifice, and lead as Christ calls us. Today I ask that you think on these things.